Now, tensions remain high over those same tariffs on Parliament Hill. The Prime Minister not mincing words when addressing those steel and aluminum levies.
Joining us now is our Ottawa correspondent, Glen McGregor. So, Glen, trade negotiations are continuing between Canada and the U.S. The Prime Minister, though, is voicing concerns.
That's right. Like Ontario Premier Doug Ford, Prime Minister Mark Carney very concerned about the effects of these tariffs on the Canadian steel and aluminum industry. The last few days, we've heard from some of those companies in that business saying that, listen, they were struggling under the 25% tariffs, but were still viable. They were still able to compete, although they were taking a big haircut on the amount of exports they were sending to the U.S. But at 50%, basically, the market in the United States is completely closed to Canadian steel and aluminum. But Mark Carney not going so far as to promise immediate retaliatory tariffs, as he has done in the past and as the steel and aluminum industry would like him to do. And there is a reason he has strategically, possibly for holding off on that, at least for now. Listen to what he had to say on his way into a caucus meeting this morning in Ottawa.
The latest tariffs on steel and aluminum are unjustified. They're illegal. They're bad for American workers, bad for American industry, and of course for Canadian industry as well. We have counter tariffs in a gross amount before remissions on over $90 billion of U.S. imports. We've acted strong. Those are in place. We will take some time, not much, some time, because we are in intensive discussions right now with the Americans on the trading relationship. Those discussions are progressing. I would note that the American action is a global action. It's not one targeted at Canada. So we will take some time, but not more, before we resolve.
So let's parse what he is saying there a little bit more closely, talking about how this is a global action, that is the tariffs of 50% on metal exports to the United States applies not only to Canada, not only to Mexico, but all countries around the world. In fact, it's really chiefly aimed at China, South Korea to a certain extent, and also at Japan. Canada is not the prime target for this, even though it is still the #1 export destination for Canadian-made steel and aluminum. But he's also saying he's going to take some time. That's suggesting the retaliation against this, if it comes, if we were to put a countervailing tariffs on American steel and aluminum exports into Canada, that it's not going to happen right away. Why not? Well, he's talking about intensive discussions. This sounds like, and I'm reading between the lines here just a little bit, he sounds like that this negotiation is going on. We heard similar comments from Doug Ford this morning, saying that he thinks this negotiation is entering a critical phase. And it sounds very much like Mark Carney doesn't want to antagonize the Trump White House by immediately slapping retaliatory tariffs on American steel products, because he doesn't want to ruin this negotiation process that is going on. The other day in Saskatoon, after the First Minister's meeting, Dominic LeBlanc, the Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, who is really handling all the outreach with the United States, mostly through his counterpart, Howard Lutnick, Trump's Commerce Secretary, was on his way there to Washington right after that meeting wrapped up in Saskatoon, presumably to pick up this discussion and these negotiations. But it may not be just negotiations about steel and aluminum. It sounds like it could be a broader discussion about the tariffs in general, the tariffs on Canadian-made all products, the initial fentanyl tariffs, remember back last fall, that Trump promised to impose, as well as the other tariffs on the auto sector, looking for kind of a global solution. Is there a way that Carney and his ministers can strike a deal here in the next few days with the Trump White House without having to resort to these retaliatory tariffs in response to the increased tariff on steel and aluminum? We'll see over the next few days. These are encouraging words if you read what Carney said closely, but if that deal falls through, and we know how mercurial Donald Trump is, and we already have a trade deal with the United States called the CUSMA or USMCA that should be enforced and should prevent this kind of things from happening. But maybe further tariffs can be avoided, and the ones that Trump has already imposed can be either eliminated altogether or at least substantially reduced through this negotiation process. That falls flat, though, I would look to see the Canadian government very quickly move to impose tariffs on U.S. metal exports.
Okay, and then it's a very different story at that point. Something else, Glenn, that you're following, one of Carney's ministers saying sorry, apologizing for comments made about Indigenous communities this week.
Yeah, right after that first ministers' meeting, there was a lot of optimism, a lot of excitement about the possibility of getting some of these big nation-building projects, as Mark Carney has called them. He's asked all the premiers for their list of their top demands for big infrastructure projects that are giving a boost to the Canadian economy in response to Donald Trump's tariffs. Things like pipelines in Ontario, the Ring of Fire, critical minerals projects are the top items on the list. But Carney's saying this is going to require, of course, consultation with Indigenous groups right across the country because they have a say in this. This was their land originally, and lots of that stuff coming out of the grounds, either in Alberta or in Ontario, they are going to want to have at least an economic interest to that. This is something that the Liberal government, both under Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney, really wanted to include Indigenous groups so that they benefit from the economic effects of these projects. But right after that meeting, Sean Fraser back in Ottawa, the Justice Minister, was asked about this, and he said, listen, yeah, that's true, we're going to consult, but Indigenous groups do not have a veto over these projects. That did not play well with Indigenous groups. In fact, Fraser got a call from the Assembly of First Nations, sort of the national Indigenous group, saying that they were not happy about it. And today he came out and said this as he was going to that caucus meeting.
Yesterday, on my way into a cabinet meeting, I made a couple of comments about the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Persons, and despite innocent intentions, I think my comments actually caused hurt and potentially eroded a very precarious trust that has been built up over many years to respect the rights of Indigenous people in this country. And it's essential that we work in partnership with Indigenous partners when it comes to issues that engage their rights and demand the respect of the Crown. I had a call last night after National Chief Woodhouse reached out expressing her frustration, and I told her unequivocally that I wanted to apologize for some of the comments.
Now, technically, Fraser was right. They don't have a veto power, but they could, if they don't like a project that is being developed, they don't feel it's being done fairly, and including them in that project, they could go to court to challenge it, and that could tie up these projects for a long time. But I think the larger issue here is the tone of the remarks from Sean Fraser. It was not perceived well by the Assembly of First Nations, as he mentioned, or other Indigenous groups, because they see themselves as partners in these projects. They want to be involved. They want to be supportive. They also want to participate economically, either through an ownership stake or through royalties. So it was seen as kind of just tone deaf by Fraser to do this. Now he's apologizing. He likely got his knuckles rapped by the Prime Minister's office for those comments, because that is not going to help these nation-building projects that Mark Carney wants to see happen if you can't get Indigenous groups on side and participating. And those remarks from Sean Fraser obviously not helpful to that effort.
All right, Glen McGregor, keeping an eye on the latest happening in Ottawa. Thanks so much.
Thanks.